Civil liberties advocates are raising alarm over news that the FBI is giving agents more leeway to conduct domestic surveillance. According to the New York Times, new guidelines will allow FBI agents to investigate people and organizations proactively without firm evidence for suspecting criminal activity. The new rules will free up agents to infiltrate organizations, search household trash, use surveillance teams, search databases, conduct lie detector tests, even without suspicion of any wrongdoing. The revised guidelines come as the FBI's existing practices have already come under wide scrutiny. Last month, the New York Times revealed a number of new revelations against activists targeted by domestic spying. One of those activists is 44-year-old Scott Crow, an Austin, Texas resident, self-proclaimed anarchist. He has just learned he was targeted by the FBI from 2001 until at least 2008. Using the Freedom of Information Act, Scott received 440 pages of heavily redacted documents revealing the FBI had traced the license plates of cars parked in front of his home, recorded the arrival and departure of his guests, observed gatherings that he attended at bookstores and cafes. The agency also tracked his emails and phone conversations, picked through his trash to identify his bank and mortgage companies, visited a gun store where he'd sought to purchase a rifle for self-defense. Agents monitored, also asked the Internal Revenue Service to examine his tax returns and even infiltrated activist groups he associated with. While Crow has been arrested a dozen times in his years of activism, he has never faced a charge more serious than trespassing. He's among a growing number of people and groups finding themselves on the receiving end of government spying. Well, Scott Crow joins us now from Austin, Texas, to tell his story. And we're also joined from Washington, D.C. by Mike German, National Security Policy Counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union. He previously served as an FBI agent specializing in domestic counterterrorism from 1988 to 2004. Mike German, we want to start with you on the most recent news of the new leeway granted to FBI agents, of which you were one years ago, to monitor people, not under any criminal charges or even suspicion. Explain what you understand is happening right now.
Right. You might remember that in 2008, Attorney General Michael Mukasey altered the Attorney General guidelines that govern the FBI's investigative authorities, and he created a new category of investigations called assessments. And these required no factual predicate. In other words, no evidence that anybody had done anything wrong, much less the person who's under investigation. And there were a number of intrusive investigative techniques that were allowed to be used, including physical surveillance, including recruiting and tasking informants, including FBI agents acting in ruse, trying to gather information from the subjects of the investigation, conducting interviews, even using grand jury subpoenas to get telephone records. What the new changes to the FBI's internal policy is to allow FBI agents, even without an assessment being open, to search commercial databases. These are subscription services of data aggregators that collect a broad swath of information and really have a lot of detailed private information about people. And also state and local law enforcement databases. Again, this is without any suspicion of wrongdoing. Without even opening an investigation, agents can start searching for all this private information. Another increase in their authority is with assessments that they use to determine whether an informant whether they could recruit an informant. And one of the things they're allowed to do is they're adding trash haul, which means that when you put your garbage out for the garbage man to pick up, it's an FBI agent picking it up instead, and they go through all this material. And when I asked why they would want to give agents that authority, again, before you have any evidence of wrongdoing, and they said, well, it's often helpful to find something derogatory that could be used to pressure the person into becoming an informant. So, this is a technique being used specifically to coerce somebody to cooperate against their neighbors or coworkers.
The FBI declined our interview request today, but did send us a statement about the new guidelines, quoting FBI General Counsel Valerie Caproni, saying, quote, "Each proposed change has been carefully looked at and considered against the backdrop of the tools our employees need to accomplish their mission, the possible risks associated with use of those tools, and the controls that are in place. Overall, this is fine-tuning, not any major change. The FBI's authority to use specific investigative tools is determined through the U.S. Constitution, U.S. statutes, executive orders, and the Attorney General's guidelines for domestic FBI operations. The Domestic Investigations Operations Guide cannot and does not confer additional powers to agents beyond that provided by those controlling authorities." Your thoughts on that, Mike German?
Well, again, the 2008 Attorney General guidelines so loosened the standards for FBI investigations that they're basically non-existent. No factual predicate is required. So the idea that agents would be able to start those investigations without even going through the administrative hurdle of opening an assessment, I think, is an expansion of power that is completely unaccountable.
I want to go to Scott Crow to hear a real-life story. Scott, talk about when you first applied under the Freedom of Information Act to get information about whether the FBI was monitoring you.
Well, it was a local organization called the Austin People's Legal Collective. It all came out after Brandon Darby came out as an informant in 2008. Austin People's Legal Collective decided to put together a FOIA request for about 30 activists, about 40 organizations, and about 10 events going back to the year 2000 in Austin. We sent it to multiple field offices around the country, and then to see what we'd get back, to try to build a picture of what kind of surveillance has been going on, if there's other infiltration. And in that, about 50% of the documents that came back with nothing. About 30% people came back with a mention, or a group came back with a mention, and then there was two cases. A case with a woman who organized the Showdown in Texas, which was an event in 2003. There was about 400 pages of documents, and then mine was a case where they had years of extensive documentation going on. And that was kind of the impetus of it all. And through that, I was able to find out that, there had been 5 informants in my life. Brandon Darby was just the last one who had run through our communities. But when we did this, we did it across 9 states, and I found out I was investigated in 9 states for arsons and other criminal acts that I was never charged with.
Now, Brandon Darby, for those who aren't familiar, who has become a very familiar name in progressive circles, explain your relationship with him and who he is.
Brandon Darby was a person who had been a friend of mine and been on the edge of the activist community within Austin for a number of years. He and I had gone to New Orleans together, and then I ended up co-founding an organization called Common Ground Relief out of those actions. And he worked at Common Ground for a couple of years and left, and then he ended up setting up, participating in this case with 2 men at the Republican National Convention, where he possibly entrapped them, but definitely provoked them into doing actions that they would not normally have done, which they ended up going to prison for. And then he came out as an informant, and it turned out he had been investigating a number of us for a number of years.
So when exactly did you get the documents from the FBI, and talk about the extent that they showed of their surveillance of you?
Well, let me backtrack for a second. I first found out that I was listed as a domestic terrorist in 2006. The FBI, in the way that they ended up doing with a lot of law enforcement around the country, is they let the local DAs and local law enforcement officers know in different cities. So in 2006, they let the DA in Baton Rouge know. And he let the lawyers for the Angola 3 know, and the Angola 3 lawyer told me. And that was the first time I ever heard about it, that I was listed as a domestic terrorist and an animal rights extremist. And what it did was it opened up this world of possibilities in this Kafkaesque world where I'm not being formally charged with anything, but all of these things are happening. I mean, I could see people sitting out in front of my house for years. I mean, all different kinds of cars. And I'm not a paranoid person. I live in a very transparent, open glass house. And but I could see all these things happening. There was a BOLO that was issued, a Be on the Lookout report that was issued in 2008, in the Austin Police Department, that said I might injure police officers, burn down police cars, or incite riots. And the way I knew about it is because people from the city that I had worked with told me that they saw this poster with my picture on it. Now, again, I couldn't do anything about this. Well, finally, in 2010, I get these documents that list me as a domestic terrorist since 2001, and the picture starts to become clear on all of the things that the FBI has been doing across multiple states to investigate me and to sow dissent, basically, amongst local and regional law enforcement.
Some of the